Hello everyone, I am Alex, and today I am bringing you the powerful and deeply moving story of Evelyn Carter. This is a story about self-worth, breaking free from toxic expectations, and discovering that true family is built on love, not obligation. Evelyn's journey will take you through heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, a transformation that is both inspiring and empowering. She learns that walking away from what no longer serves her is not a loss, but a victory. This story will resonate with anyone who has ever felt like they had to prove themselves to people who refuse to see them. It is a reminder that sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves. Stay with me until the end, you won't want to miss the lesson Evelyn's story has to offer. Let's begin. The golden morning light filtered through the tree-lined streets of Ridgewood, casting soft shadows over the well-kept garden of a modest yet refined brownstone. Inside, the kitchen was alive with the comforting hum of morning rituals. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm buttered toast mingled in the air, a quiet testament to the home Evelyn Carter had built for herself. She moved with effortless precision, her hands gliding over the smooth marble countertops as she plated breakfast. A row of white ceramic planters lined the windowsill, lush with rosemary, thyme, and basil, small tokens of the life she had cultivated, one rooted in simplicity and intention rather than excess and performance. At 34, Evelyn was a woman who had learned the delicate art of balance. Her long auburn hair, neatly swept over one shoulder, framed a face that held both quiet strength and the subtle weariness of someone who had spent years walking a tightrope between expectation and independence. Dressed in a crisp, navy blue dress, she embodied the effortless elegance of a woman who knew who she was, even if the world she had left behind never quite accepted it. She set down a plate of golden brown toast and a bowl of oatmeal, the blueberries carefully arranged, as if the act of making things perfect could bring her peace. Across from her, Nathan, her husband of 5 years, sat with his coffee in hand, flipping through the morning paper. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, but there was a casual ease in the way he carried himself, a man who had built success without pretense or entitlement. "Perfect as always," he said, setting the paper aside, his smile warm and genuine. "Starting my day with your breakfast is still my favorite part of the morning." Evelyn returned the smile, but it did not quite reach her eyes. Because even as the warmth of the moment settled around her, something inside her felt unsettled, a quiet, familiar weight pressing against her chest. And then, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Dad. The name alone made her fingers hesitate for just a second before she reached for the phone, masking the flicker of tension that passed through her. "Morning, Dad." Her father's voice came through the receiver, unusually upbeat, a tone that immediately set her on edge. "Eve. It's your mother and I's anniversary today. We're having dinner at LeClaire, 7:30 sharp. You and Nathan should join us." Evelyn gripped the phone a little tighter. LeClaire. It was not just a restaurant. It was a statement. One of the most exclusive French establishments in downtown Chicago, a place where old money gathered beneath the soft glow of chandeliers, where status was woven into every delicate dish served on fine china. A place that had always made Evelyn feel like an outsider in her own family. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again, a new message. "Ashley, answer quickly. Are you seriously going to skip out again? How long do you plan to keep being stubborn?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. Her younger sister, Ashley, at 31, was everything their parents had wanted her to be. A sales director at their father's real estate firm, a woman who wore her privilege like a badge of honor rather than a burden. Ashley had never struggled to fit in, never questioned the carefully curated image their family projected to the world. And lately, she had taken to treating Evelyn's independence not as a choice, but as defiance. A familiar frustration rose in Evelyn's chest, but she pushed it down. Nathan had been watching her, the crease between his brows barely visible but unmistakable. He knew her too well. Their silent understanding filled the space between them. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. He already knew. That no matter how much Evelyn had built her own life, her family still held the ability to shake its foundation. That even after all these years, she was still caught in the gravitational pull of a world she had left behind. And that, once again, she was being drawn back in. She inhaled slowly, pressing the phone back to her ear. "All right," she said finally, her voice measured, composed. "We'll be there." She ended the call, setting the phone down with a soft clink against the marble counter. But the unease remained. Nathan reached across the table, his fingers curling gently around hers. "You okay?" Evelyn offered a small, practiced smile, but something in her eyes gave her away. Yes. Probably. A part of her wanted to believe this time would be different. That this invitation was about family, not appearances. That tonight would not be another carefully orchestrated reminder of where she failed to fit in. She wanted to believe it. But experience had taught her otherwise. Nathan squeezed her hand gently, a silent reassurance. Whatever happened tonight, she wouldn't have to face it alone. Evelyn took a slow sip of coffee, exhaling softly. Tonight would be fine. She had convinced herself of that before. And every time, she had been wrong. The rain had begun as a drizzle in the late afternoon but had settled into a steady rhythm by the time Evelyn Carter's taxi pulled up in front of Leclerc. The cream-colored facade of the restaurant gleamed under the golden glow of the streetlights, rain-slicked pavement reflecting the grandeur of a place where status mattered more than substance. The name Leclerc was scripted in elegant, understated gold, a quiet reminder that only the right kind of people belonged here. Evelyn stared at the building for a moment, fingers tightening around the smooth leather of her clutch. This wasn't just a dinner. It never was. She had dressed carefully. A deep blue cocktail dress, sleek and sophisticated, a deliberate statement, refined, but not performative. She had learned, over the years, to toe that line carefully whenever she stepped into her parents' world. Not too flashy, not too modest, just enough to remind them that she had built a life of her own, that she did not need their validation. But despite her careful preparation, that familiar weight settled in her chest again. She exhaled slowly before stepping out into the misty night air. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement as she approached the grand entrance, the heavy brass door handle cool against her fingertips. She caught a glimpse of herself in the glass reflection, poised, composed, but beneath the polished surface, something in her eyes gave her away. She already knew how this night would end. Inside, the glow of chandeliers draped in crystal bathed the space in a soft, golden haze. The quiet hum of conversation mixed with the delicate clink of silverware against porcelain, the faint melody of a Chopin nocturne drifting from a grand piano in the corner. It was all so practiced, so choreographed. A waiter approached, but before she could speak, a familiar voice greeted her. "Miss Carter, welcome." Evelyn turned to find Andrew, the restaurant's floor manager, standing with a carefully curated smile. His bow tie was perfectly aligned, his posture impeccable, a man trained to recognize wealth, to cater to those who believed they were above the rest. "I'm meeting my family," she said smoothly. "Of course," he nodded, his tone effortlessly polite. "Right this way." She followed him through the dining room, past elegantly dressed patrons sipping wine worth more than most people's rent. A woman at a nearby table laughed lightly, tilting her head just so, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier's glow, a practiced performance of affluence. Evelyn's heartbeat settled into a steady, measured rhythm as they approached the private dining area. She had walked into enough of these dinners to know exactly how this would go. The performance. The well-placed remarks, the subtle reminders that she had chosen the wrong path. The expectation that, eventually, she would fall back in line. But even with all her anticipation, nothing prepared her for what she saw when she reached the table. They had already eaten. The remnants of a lavish meal, *** lobster shells cracked open, steak bones stripped clean, and the final drops of a $180 bottle of Bordeaux clinging to the inside of a crystal glass, *** sat carelessly on th. White tablecloth. Like evidence of a gathering she had never truly been invited to. Oh. A slow, sinking sensation settled in Evelyn's stomach. She had known, of course. Deep down, she had known. But to see it laid out in front of her, so blatant, so unapologetic, made something sharp twist inside her. Across the table, her mother, Victoria Carter, dabbed at her lips with a white linen napkin before offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Evelyn, you made it," she said smoothly, as if her daughter's arrival was nothing more than a minor footnote in an evening that had already concluded. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her gaze drift across the table. Her father, Richard Carter, sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but the tight set of his jaw betrayed him. Though still dressed in a tailored navy suit, there was something in the way he held himself, the slightest slump of his shoulders, the subtle weight in his gaze, that suggested time had finally begun to catch up with him. And then there was Ashley. Seated across from their parents, she swirled the last remnants of Bordeaux in her glass, watching the wine coat the sides before offering Evelyn a slow, knowing smirk. Unlike Evelyn, Ashley had never questioned their world. She wore her privilege with ease, the way someone wears a designer coat, thoughtlessly, comfortably, without ever considering what it cost. Her dress was from the most expensive department store in the city, just flashy enough to make a statement, but not so desperate that it looked like she was trying too hard. Beside her, the latest model smartphone lay on the table, placed carefully within view, a subtle reminder of the kind of life she had, and the one Evelyn had walked away from. "You're late," Ashley said lightly, her voice laced with mock disappointment. Then, she tilted her head, offering a slow, saccharine smile. "You'll take care of the bill, won't you?" The words were spoken so casually, as if the expectation were as simple as passing the salt. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her bones. Of course. Of course. This wasn't an anniversary dinner. It was a trap. A carefully laid reminder of her place, or rather, the place they believed she should occupy. An expectation that she would pick up the tab for their indulgence, just as she had so many times before. For a brief moment, she said nothing. The air around the table grew thick with something unspoken. It was a game they had played for years. And tonight, they had expected her to play along. But tonight, the rules had changed. Slowly, Evelyn checked her watch. 7:30 p.m. Exactly on time. A cold, sharp anger spread through her, but outwardly, she remained composed. "I'd like to confirm the reservation time," she said, her voice remarkably calm. A flicker of confusion crossed Andrew's face. He had expected compliance. Not resistance. "Your reservation is. Could I speak with the manager?" Evelyn interrupted, her tone unshakable, deliberate. The shift in atmosphere was instant. Her mother's smile froze. Her father straightened slightly in his chair. Ashley's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. A tell. A moment of unguarded tension. At the surrounding tables, conversation lulled, not entirely stopping, but slowing just enough to signal that people were starting to take notice. A moment later, a new presence entered the scene. And everything began to unravel. A charged silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the table, her carefully composed expression betraying nothing. Across from her, her mother, Victoria's polished smile had cracked at the edges. Her father, Richard, remained still, but the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his cufflinks did not go unnoticed. And Ashley, always so smug, always so certain of her place, was gripping her wine glass so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Evelyn let the weight of the moment settle before she spoke. "So, let me get this straight," she said, her voice even, but unmistakably sharp. "The reservation was made for 6 o'clock. You finished dinner well before I arrived. And yet, you told me to come at 7:30. No one answered. At surrounding tables, conversation had softened to a low murmur. Not a complete hush, but just enough to signal that people were beginning to take notice. Evelyn's gaze swept the table, pausing on the half-empty bottle of Bordeaux, the discarded lobster shells, the elegantly plated, but long since abandoned, dessert. They had never intended for her to be a part of this evening. Not as a daughter. Not as family. Only as the one expected to foot the bill. A slow, measured breath filled Evelyn's lungs. She should have been used to this by now. But tonight, something inside her refused to bend. Victoria was the first to recover, her laugh light, practiced, too well rehearsed to be real. "Oh, darling, don't make a fuss," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We assumed you'd be busy with work, and it just made sense for us to start early." "Right." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, studying her mother with quiet precision. "And yet, somehow," she said, voice cool, "I'm still expected to pick up the check." Victoria blinked, as if caught off guard by the bluntness of the statement. Ashley let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes. "God, Evelyn, do you always have to be so dramatic?" Evelyn turned to her sister, watching as Ashley's carefully cultivated mask of confidence began to slip. "Dramatic?" Evelyn repeated, slowly. "No, Ashley. Dramatic would be leading someone to believe they were joining their family for a celebration, only for them to walk into an empty table and a nearly maxed-out wine bill." Ashley's jaw tightened. Evelyn didn't stop there. Dramatic would be pretending to care about family while using them as a financial safety net whenever it's convenient. Richard cleared his throat, shifting in his seat, his discomfort becoming more visible by the second. "Now, let's not turn this into something it's not," he said, his voice treading carefully between authority and unease. "We just wanted to have dinner together. That's all." Evelyn stilled for just a moment. That's all. She had wanted that too, once. She had wanted to believe that this time, this dinner, this invitation, this moment, would be different. But the pattern never changed. And tonight, she wasn't going to let it slide. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "I apologize for being late." The deep, steady voice sent a ripple through the air. Evelyn turned just as Nathan stepped forward, his presence instantly commanding attention. He had changed out of his work attire, now dressed in a sleek black suit, subtle, refined, but carrying an undeniable authority. Her father stiffened slightly. Her mother's expression flickered, an unreadable emotion flashing across her face. "Nathan," Richard's voice was noticeably strained. Nathan gave a polite nod before sliding his hands into his pockets, his posture relaxed but unshakably composed. "I'm glad I could make it," he said, his voice carrying a weight that shifted the balance of the entire conversation. He glanced at Evelyn, then at the empty plates on the table. His gaze lingered for just a second longer than necessary, enough to make it clear that he had already pieced everything together. Then, with effortless calm, he turned to the restaurant's general manager, who had been standing by with the quiet attentiveness of a man who had witnessed more than his share of high-society conflicts. "James, could you remind me of the restaurant's reservation policies?" Nathan asked smoothly. James, ever the professional, straightened his posture. "Of course, Mr. Carter." He pulled up the reservation log on his tablet. The Carter party was booked for 6 o'clock. However, we received a note requesting Miss Evelyn Carter to arrive at 7:30 separately. Silence. A silence so palpable, so deafening, that it felt like a physical presence at the table. Evelyn's eyes met her mother's. For the first time in years, Victoria Carter had nothing to say. Nathan turned back to the table, offering the faintest of smiles. "Well," he said, "since dinner has already been enjoyed, I'd hate to impose." He glanced at Evelyn. "Shall we?" Evelyn hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because she had never felt quite so liberated. She had spent so long feeling like she had to justify her choices, like she had to prove her worth to a family who only ever saw value in wealth and status. But standing here now, watching the carefully constructed illusion of her family's control crumble right in front of them, she realized something. She didn't need their approval. She never had. A slow, steady breath filled her lungs. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Nathan fell into step beside her, his presence solid, unwavering. Behind them, the table remained frozen in stunned silence. And for the first time in a long, long time, Evelyn Carter felt completely and utterly free. Evelyn Carter sat in the back of the taxi, the city lights of Chicago's Gold Coast streaking past the rain-slicked windows. She had spent the entire ride home in silence, the remnants of the night at LeClaire lingering like a ghost in the air around her. Nathan sat beside her, his fingers loosely intertwined with hers, not gripping, not pressing, just there, a quiet presence that tethered her back to reality. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel hurt. She just felt free. For the first time in years, she wasn't replaying every word in her head, wasn't obsessing over what she could have said differently, wasn't carrying the weight of disappointment settling into her bones like an old ache. Because this time, she had left the game before it could even begin. As the car slowed in front of their brownstone, Evelyn exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something she hadn't even realized she'd been holding on to. The rain had softened into a light drizzle, the kind that made the world feel quieter, almost reflective. Nathan pulled out his wallet, but Evelyn touched his wrist lightly. "I've got it," she murmured. He didn't argue. He just studied her for a moment, as if taking in the quiet transformation happening right in front of him. When they stepped inside, warmth wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. The scent of lavender and vanilla from a candle left burning filled the air, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of LeClaire, where wealth had always reeked of something artificial. Nathan shrugged off his coat, hanging it on the hook by the door before turning to face her. "They're going to call," he said simply. Evelyn let out a soft, knowing laugh as she slipped off her heels. "Oh, absolutely." She stretched her arms above her head, rolling the tension from her shoulders. "But not tonight. Tonight, they're still trying to figure out how they lost control of the conversation." Nathan smirked. "And when they do?" Evelyn considered it for a long moment before shaking her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "But for once, I'm not in a rush to fix things." Nathan watched her for a beat longer before stepping closer, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple. "I'm proud of you," he murmured. And for the first time, Evelyn felt like she could be proud of herself too. The call. The next morning, it came. Her father's name flashed across the screen just after noon, while Evelyn sat in her downtown office, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hello." "Evelyn," Richard Carter's voice was measured, but there was an edge to it. "We need to talk." She leaned back in her chair, twirling a pen between her fingers. "I figured you'd say that." A pause. Then, a slow exhale. "You made a scene last night," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "No," Evelyn corrected. "I asked a question. You're the ones who panicked." Another silence. And then, for the first time in her entire life, her father said something she had never expected to hear. "This family is in trouble," he admitted. "And I don't just mean last night." Evelyn's fingers stilled over the pen. "I know," she said simply. Because she did. She had seen the signs for months. The slightly outdated suits. The nervous glances. The uncharacteristic eagerness to have her and Nathan pay for things. Her family had always lived beyond their means, but for the first time, it was clear, they weren't struggling to maintain appearances. They were drowning. "The company?" she asked, already knowing the answer. A long pause. "We're barely keeping it afloat," Richard admitted. "Real estate isn't what it used to be. The market changed, and he hesitated. I refuse to see it. Evelyn closed her eyes. So that was it. The Carter Empire, the one her parents had sacrificed relationships for, had used as a tool for control, was now collapsing under its own weight. And they had been hoping she wouldn't notice. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice calm but unwavering. "I need your help," Richard said. And it sounded like it physically pained him to admit it. Evelyn let out a slow breath. A year ago, **, 5 years ago, **, she would have jumped at the chance. She would have seen this as an opportunity to prove herself, to show her father that she was capable, that she was worth more than just being a footnote in the Carter legacy. But she wasn't that woman anymore. "I'm not coming back," she said, already anticipating his response. "I built my own career, my own life. And I'm not abandoning it to clean up a mess I didn't make." Another long silence. "I see," Richard said finally. And for the first time in her life, he didn't argue. He didn't try to manipulate her. He just accepted it. And somehow, that was worse. Evelyn rubbed her temple, exhaling slowly. She should have felt vindicated. But instead, all she felt was the weight of it all, the years of trying, the exhaustion of always being the one to bridge the gap. She inhaled deeply before speaking again. "I'll connect you with someone who can help," she said after a moment. "An outside consultant. Someone who can actually fix this." She could hear her father processing the offer, the way his pride and his desperation warred against each other. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you," he said. And Evelyn believed him. Not because she had given him what he wanted, but because, for the first time in her life, he was seeing her as an equal. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the kitchen, blending with the soft crackle of the fireplace in the next room. Outside, the first snowfall of the season had begun, dusting the quiet neighborhood of Ridgewood in a blanket of white. Inside, the warm glow of dimmed lights and flickering embers made the living room feel cozy, intimate, different. Evelyn Carter sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a stack of documents, her fingers absently tracing the edges of the pages. Across from her, her father, Richard Carter, adjusted his reading glasses and studied the forms with a focus she hadn't seen in years. The weight he once carried, the relentless pursuit of an image, of keeping up appearances, was gone. In its place was something else. Something real. "Everything looks in order," Richard said finally, setting the papers down. "I'll sign the final contracts tomorrow." Evelyn nodded, suppressing a small smile. 6 months ago, this conversation would have been impossible. 6 months ago, Richard Carter wouldn't have admitted he needed help, let alone accepted it. But after the disastrous night at LeClaire, things had shifted. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But slowly, in small but meaningful ways. Her father had taken her advice, bringing in the outside consultants she had recommended. The restructuring of his real estate company had been painful, forcing him to sell off properties he had once deemed untouchable. Downsizing, cutting back, learning to live within reality instead of chasing an illusion, it had been a humbling process. But he had done it. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't doing it alone. "Penny for your thoughts?" Richard asked, glancing at her with something dangerously close to amusement. Evelyn shook her head, chuckling. "Just thinking about how much has changed." Richard exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I spent so many years trying to hold on to something that was already gone," he admitted. "Trying to make people believe we were invincible, even when we were barely staying afloat." Evelyn didn't respond right away. Because the truth was, she understood. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe not for the same reasons. But she knew what it felt like to cling to something out of fear. She had spent years wanting their approval, convincing herself that if she could just prove her worth, just show them she was enough, they would finally see her. But that night at LeClaire had shattered the illusion. She had stopped waiting for them to change. And ironically, that's when they finally did. The sound of hurried footsteps pulled them from the conversation. "I checked the results," a voice announced breathlessly. Evelyn turned just as Ashley burst into the kitchen, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her younger sister's eyes were wide, a mix of anticipation and something Evelyn hadn't seen in a long time, genuine vulnerability. "I passed," Ashley breathed out. "I actually passed." For a beat, there was silence. Then, Richard laughed, an honest, relieved sound. Ashley had spent the last 6 months rebuilding herself too. After resigning from the family company, she had enrolled in real estate courses, determined to earn her place on her own terms. It had been an uphill battle. Ashley had never known a world where success wasn't handed to her. But tonight, she had something she had never had before. An accomplishment that was entirely her own. Evelyn didn't think. She simply stood and pulled her sister into a tight embrace. "I'm proud of you," she murmured. And she meant it. Ashley let out a shaky breath. "It's all because of you. You showed me that there's another way." Evelyn pulled back, shaking her head. "No," she said gently. "You did this. You made the choice. You put in the work." Ashley swallowed hard, nodding. It was strange, how much could change in just 6 months. How a sister who had once been her greatest rival had become her greatest ally. The sound of the front door opening caught their attention. "I'm home," Nathan's voice carried through the house. Evelyn turned as he stepped inside, shaking the snow off his coat. But it wasn't just Nathan she noticed. In his arms, he carried a small Christmas tree, the evergreen branches dusted with white from the snowfall outside. "Thought we could decorate together," he said with a small smile. Something tightened in Evelyn's chest, but in a good way. Nathan set the tree down and stepped toward her, his gaze softening as he reached out, gently placing a hand over her stomach. A barely noticeable bump. A heartbeat that was still too small to feel but already so much a part of her. Evelyn inhaled slowly, pressing her hand over his. "I was waiting for the right time to tell everyone," she admitted. Richard's eyes widened, his usual restraint crumbling entirely. "Jenny," he breathed, the nickname slipping out before he could stop it. Ashley clasped her hands over her mouth, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're serious?" Evelyn smiled for the first time that night, a real, unguarded smile. "I'm serious," she confirmed. "We're having a baby." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Richard did something she had never seen before. He blinked rapidly, swallowed hard, and, without hesitation, pulled her into a hug. Not a stiff, formal embrace. A real one. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he murmured. "Better than I ever was a father." Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the warmth of his words settle deep. "We all get second chances," she whispered. She pulled back, glancing around the room at the family she had thought she lost. They weren't perfect. They never would be. But for the first time, they were honest. And maybe, that was enough. Nathan cleared his throat, rubbing his hands together. "So, tree first, or cookies?" Ashley sniffled, laughing as she wiped her eyes. "Tree. Definitely tree." As they moved to decorate, Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Not because everything was perfect. But because for the first time, her family wasn't built on expectations or pretense. It was built on love. And that was enough. The gentle flicker of the fireplace cast a warm glow across the living room, its soft light reflecting off the ornaments that now adorned the freshly decorated Christmas tree. Outside, snow continued to fall in delicate patterns, blanketing the quiet streets of Ridgewood in a serene, untouched white. Inside, the air smelled of fresh pine, vanilla, and the lingering scent of cinnamon cookies baking in the oven. Evelyn Carter sat curled up on the couch, one hand resting over the barely noticeable curve of her stomach, the other wrapped around a warm mug of tea. 6 months ago, she never would have imagined this moment. Not just the baby. Not just the peace. But the feeling of being surrounded by family, not out of obligation, not out of expectation, but because they had finally learned how to be one. Across the room, her mother, Victoria Carter, moved with an ease Evelyn had never seen before. She wore an apron, an image that once would have been unthinkable, as she stood at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging fresh-baked cookies onto a tray. Her diamond jewelry, once an ever-present reminder of her status, was absent. In its place was something simpler, a genuine, contented smile. "Mom, don't forget the powdered sugar," Ashley called from beside her, peering over her shoulder. Victoria scoffed, though there was no real irritation in it. "I know how to make cookies, dear." Ashley smirked. "That's debatable." Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head as she watched them. It was strange, this new version of their family. The shift hadn't been instant. It hadn't been easy. But it had been real. Her father, Richard, sat beside her on the couch, flipping through a real estate journal. He still worked, he still carried the same sharp mind that had once built their family empire. But he no longer measured his worth by the deals he closed or the houses he owned. The company was stable again, smaller but healthier, more sustainable. He had learned to adapt. More importantly, he had learned to let go. He adjusted his reading glasses and glanced at Evelyn, his expression softening. "I still can't believe you're going to be a mother," he said, shaking his head slightly. Evelyn smirked. "Me neither." Richard sighed, leaning back into his chair. "I was too proud for too long," he admitted. "Too focused on the wrong things." Evelyn studied him, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the curve of her teacup. She had spent so many years waiting for this moment, waiting for acknowledgement, for an apology, for something to justify all the times she had felt like she didn't belong. But now, sitting here, she realized she didn't need it anymore. Because she had built a world of her own. "I know," she said quietly. And for the first time, that was enough. Just then, the front door swung open, bringing in a gust of cold air and the familiar sound of footsteps. "I come bearing gifts," Nathan's voice rang through the room. Evelyn turned just as her husband stepped inside, brushing snow off his coat, a bright red gift bag dangling from his wrist. His presence, as always, made the room feel warmer, more grounded. "Please tell me it's food," Ashley said, eyeing the bag suspiciously. Nathan smirked. "Better. Baby books." Evelyn groaned playfully. "Oh no. Not more parenting advice." "You can never be too prepared," Nathan teased, setting the bag down and pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Ashley snatched the bag and began rifling through the books. What to expect when you're expecting. The Newborn Sleep Bible, and, oh wow, Diaper Duty 101. She snorted. "That one's for you, Nathan." Nathan shot her a mock-offended look before turning back to Evelyn. "I figured we might as well start learning." Evelyn leaned into him, exhaling softly. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worried about where she stood. She wasn't questioning if she was enough, if she was worthy, if she had made the right choices. She knew. She had spent years trying to fit into a version of family that never truly saw her. But now, sitting here, surrounded by people who had finally learned to appreciate her, not for what she could offer, not for what she could prove, but simply for who she was, she realized something. She had never been the one who needed to change. They had. And they had. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But in a way that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She glanced up at Nathan, smiling. "You ready for this?" Nathan squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. "With you?" "Always." A lump formed in her throat, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from joy. True, quiet, earned joy. Ashley tossed an ornament toward her. Enough with the sappy moment. We have a tree to finish decorating. Evelyn caught it, laughing. As she placed the ornament onto the tree, the fire crackled, the scent of warm cookies filled the air, and outside, the snow continued to fall. A new chapter had begun. Not perfect. Not without challenges. But real. And that was all she had ever wanted. Evelyn Carter's story is a testament to the power of self-worth and the courage to break free from expectations that no longer serve us. Too often, we find ourselves trapped in cycles of seeking validation from people who will never truly see us. Evelyn's journey reminds us that true strength lies not in proving our worth to others, but in recognizing it for ourselves. She learned that family is not defined by shared blood or tradition, but by genuine love, respect, and effort. The people who truly matter are those who choose to stand beside us, not because of obligation, but because they value us for who we are. Like Evelyn, we must learn that walking away is not always a sign of defeat. Sometimes, it is the bravest step toward freedom. And in that freedom, we find the life we were always meant to live.